The year was 1870, and the frontier wore its scars like an old soldier, dust blowing across bones, wind whispering through ghost towns, graves half sunk into the earth. A place where lawmen and killers were sometimes one and the same. On nights when the moon was thin and the stars burned cold, men whispered about a figure who moved through the dark with the silence of a wolf. Some called him a ghost. Others swore he was the devil's own shadow. His name, though few knew it, was Jonas Hale. That night, Jonas came riding low in the saddle, hat brim pulled to hide his eyes, horse breathing hard beneath him. Ahead, firelight licked the walls of an abandoned way station. Through the cracks he saw silhouettes, men laughing, bottles clinking, a woman's sob muffled by a calloused hand. Outlaws, 5 of them. He slid from the saddle without a sound, boots sinking into dust, Colt revolvers heavy at his sides. Inside, the laughter curdled into cruelty. One outlaw grabbed the woman's wrist and shoved her across the floorboards. She screamed once before another hand clamped her mouth shut. Jonas moved through the shadows like a man used to silence, used to killing. His breathing never changed. His heart didn't quicken. He kicked the door in and firelight flared across his face. The first shot dropped the man by the door before he could lift his rifle. A second, outlaw lunged for his pistol. Jonas shot him through the gut and didn't bother watching him fall. The others scrambled, the woman screaming now, stumbling for the corner. Gunfire thundered in the cramped room, boards splintering, glass shattering. Jonas moved with cold precision, step, fire, reload, fire again, until the only sound left was the woman's ragged sobs and the groaning wind through the doorway. When it was done, Jonas stood among the bodies. His face betrayed nothing. He walked past the woman, who shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. He left her alive, but he offered no comfort, no word. He stepped back into the night and mounted his horse. By dawn, he was gone, and the story of the ghost killer spread another mile across the frontier. The sun rose over a quiet town nestled against the edge of the plains. Jonas arrived with dust in his hair, dried blood staining his sleeve, his horse lathered from a night's ride. He tied the reins outside a saloon and pushed through the doors. Smoke and whiskey hit him like a wall. Men hunched over cards, eyes narrowing at the stranger in black. Jonas ordered coffee, sat alone, and waited for the room to look away. At the far end of the saloon, a woman carried a tray from the kitchen. She was young, though grief had carved years into her face. Her dress was plain, patched at the seams. Stray strands of chestnut hair clung to her temples as she bent to wipe a spill from the counter. At her heels trotted a boy no older than 8, thin as a rail, shirt too big for his small frame. He tried to help, but the tray was too heavy. The woman, Clara, someone called her, smiled at him with weary tenderness. Jonas watched without meaning to. The boy's laugh was quick, light, cutting through the haze of smoke like sunlight through storm clouds. Jonas lowered his gaze, trying to bury the sound in the silence he carried inside. But the boy noticed him. Children always noticed what grown men ignored. A drunk at the bar leaned across Clara's path, blocking her with a grin that reeked of rot gut. "How much for a smile, darlin'?" He slurred, fingers catching her arm. Clara stiffened, whispered for him to let go. The drunk only laughed louder, tugging harder. The boy tried to shove him away, but the man's hand swept him aside like a rag doll. Jonas was on his feet before the thought reached his mind. He crossed the floor in 3 strides. The drunk turned, lips parting in protest, but Jonas's hand clamped his wrist and twisted. Bone cracked. The drunk howled, collapsing to his knees. Jonas didn't draw his gun. He didn't have to. The man scrambled backward, clutching his wrist, cursing under his breath as he stumbled out the swinging doors. The saloon fell into hush. Jonas turned back, met Clara's wide, startled eyes. She opened her mouth, perhaps to thank him, perhaps to curse him for drawing more danger. But the boy spoke first, eyes bright as lantern light. "Mister," he said softly, "you came like lightning." Jonas looked at the boy, at his thin frame, at the smudge of dirt on his cheek, at the way he clung to his mother's skirts with small, trembling hands. Something in Jonas's chest shifted, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He nodded once and left his coffee untouched. Outside, the air smelled of dust and horses. Jonas untied his mount, ready to leave town before the sheriff came asking questions, but he heard footsteps behind him. Clara stood in the doorway, the boy clutching her hand. She studied Jonas with suspicion, gratitude, and fear all tangled together. "I don't know who you are," she said quietly, "but you've already drawn eyes we don't need. Best keep your distance." Jonas tipped his hat without a word. He mounted and turned his horse toward the open road. Yet, as he rode away, he felt the boy's gaze burning into his back. He didn't know why, but it followed him, heavy as the weight of a rifle on his shoulder. He camped outside town, meaning to push west by morning. But before dawn, he heard voices carried by the wind. He crept through mesquite brush and saw torches weaving across the plain. Riders, a dozen at least, they bore the mark of a land baron Jonas had heard of, a man who collected ranches like poker chips. Their leader spat into the dirt, pointing toward the small homestead not far from town. Clara's place. Jonas cursed under his breath. He could ride on, leave the widow and her boy to whatever fate the land baron had planned. It wasn't his fight. He owed nothing to them. But the boy's words clung to him. "You came like lightning." Lightning didn't choose where it struck. It simply did. By evening, Jonas found himself on Clara's porch. She met him with a shotgun aimed at his chest. "I told you to stay away," she said. Jonas raised his hands, calm as stone. "You've got trouble coming. Men riding under Grady Finch. They aim to take your land." Clara's grip tightened on the shotgun. "And why would you care?" "I don't," Jonas answered. "But I don't abide men who prey on widows and children. Let me stay tonight. Tomorrow I'll be gone." She hesitated, then lowered the gun. "One night," she said. The boy's face lit up as if Christmas had come early. He peppered Jonas with questions: where he came from, how many guns he owned, if he'd ever killed a bear with his bare hands. Jonas answered none of them. He worked the corral in silence, mended a fence, sharpened a blade. Yet everywhere he turned, the boy was there, watching, mimicking, studying. At supper, Clara placed a bowl of stew before Jonas. The smell of onions and venison filled the small cabin. For a moment, it felt almost like family: fire crackling, bowls clinking, a boy laughing at nothing at all. Jonas felt the warmth creep into the cracks of his armor. He hated it. He needed it. That night, as the family slept, Jonas sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees. The prairie stretched endless beneath the stars. He thought of faces, men he had killed, men who would never see another dawn. Their eyes haunted him. But when he closed his own eyes, he saw the boy instead, smiling, calling him Lightning. The sound of hooves shattered the stillness. Jonas rose, rifle at the ready. Shadows moved against the horizon. Riders, just as he had warned. They came fast, torches burning, guns glinting. Jonas slipped inside and shook Clara awake. "They're here," he whispered. Her eyes went wide. She reached for her shotgun. The boy stirred, blinking in confusion. Jonas knelt beside him. "Stay quiet, stay low." The riders swept in, shouting, firing into the air. Jonas stepped out into the night, shadows clinging to him like a cloak. His first shot dropped a man from the saddle. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked, horses screamed, men cursed as they fell. Jonas moved through the dark with deadly grace, each shot deliberate, each strike final. Inside, Eli clutched his mother's skirts, eyes wide as the world turned to fire and thunder outside. He peeked through the shutters and saw Jonas, a man who moved like a storm, unyielding, unstoppable. The last outlaw stumbled, bleeding, crawling toward the brush. Jonas stood over him, revolver raised. But instead of firing, he let the man crawl into the night, broken and beaten. He lowered his gun, chest heaving, face unreadable. Behind him, a small voice broke the silence. "Pa!" Jonas froze. The words sliced through him, sharper than any blade, heavier than any bullet. He turned slowly. The boy stood in the doorway, eyes shining not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. Jonas said nothing. The night was quiet again, save for the crackle of burning torches and the sound of his own heart, a sound he thought he'd forgotten. Jonas didn't answer the boy. He couldn't. The words still echoed in his chest as he holstered his gun and dragged the dead outlaws into the dirt. Clara said nothing while he worked, though her eyes followed him with equal parts suspicion and need. When the last body was laid in the dust, Jonas poured lamp oil over them and struck a match. The fire rose, sending black smoke twisting into the stars. Wolves would come sniffing soon enough, but it didn't matter. He wasn't burying killers tonight. When he stepped back onto the porch, Clara was waiting with her shotgun. Her knuckles were white around the stock. The boy had long since fallen asleep, curled on the floor by the hearth, thumb pressed against his lips. Jonas leaned against the post, the fire crackling behind him, and met her gaze. "You brought this trouble," she said, her voice low and edged with steel. Jonas shook his head. That trouble was already coming. Finch has his hands in half this county. A widow sittin' on decent pasture? He was bound to try his luck. She bristled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she looked past him, toward the flames that licked the night sky. "I can't afford more enemies." "You've already got 'em," Jonas said. He tugged his hat lower, his voice flat as stone. "Best get used to it." She said nothing more. By morning, Jonas had saddled his horse, intent on leaving. He'd done enough, more than enough. But when he turned to mount up, Eli appeared at the door, rubbing his eyes with tiny fists. The boy looked at him as if the whole world balanced on whether Jonas stayed or left. "You'll come back?" the boy asked. Jonas felt his throat tighten in a way he hadn't known in years. He swung into the saddle, pulled the reins, and forced the only answer he could manage. "Don't count on it." He rode away, but the boy's face haunted him worse than the men he'd killed. For 2 days, he drifted west, cutting through canyons where red cliffs rose like cathedral walls, across plains where the wind howled like a restless spirit. Yet every night when he lay under the stars, he saw Eli's wide eyes staring at him, heard that one word, "Pa," spoken with a faith Jonas didn't deserve. He tried whiskey. It dulled the edge, but never quieted the echo. On the third morning, he turned his horse back east. He told himself it was only to make sure Finch hadn't returned, only to set Clara straight about the danger ahead. Lies, he knew them when he heard them, even from his own mouth. When Clara opened the door to find him standing there, her face hardened. "I told you one night, not more." Jonas brushed past her without asking, dropped a sack of flour and dried beans on the table. "Supplies. Your boy's too thin." She stared at the sack, then at him. Her voice was sharp but softer than before. "We don't take charity." "Not charity," he said. "Payment. For supper." Eli came bounding in then, nearly tripping over his own boots. "You came back," he shouted, throwing his arms around Jonas's waist. Clara tried to pull him back, but Jonas's hand found the boy's shoulder before he could think to stop it. It was a gentle grip, steady. From that night forward, Jonas stayed. He worked the corral, hauled water, split wood. He taught Eli how to set traps for rabbits, how to listen for the shift of wind that warned of a storm. Clara kept her distance, though at times she watched him with an expression Jonas couldn't read, half anger, half something softer she didn't want to admit. But when the sun went down and the homestead slept, Jonas became the ghost again. He saddled his horse and rode into the night. There were men on Finch's payroll scattered across the county, scouts, thugs, claim jumpers. One by one, Jonas found them. He came out of the dark with pistols whispering thunder, leaving bodies sprawled in campsites, in canyons, in riverbeds. Word spread quick. Folks whispered that some shadow was thinning Finch's ranks. But no one knew his name, and Jonas meant to keep it that way. Each time he returned before dawn, his hands smelled of powder, his coat of blood. He washed in the creek before stepping back inside Clara's cabin, but he never felt clean. He'd sit by the fire, watching Eli breathe softly in his sleep, wondering what kind of man let a boy call him father while he butchered strangers under the stars. It couldn't last. It never did. The first sign came in the form of a bounty hunter, lean and long as a whip, with cold gray eyes and a scar running from temple to chin. He rode into town one afternoon, his spurs jingling like coins in a gambler's cup. Folks knew trouble when they saw it. They crossed the street to avoid his path. He found Jonas in the livery, brushing down his horse. For a moment, the place was quiet but for the sound of hooves shifting in straw. "Jonas Hale," the hunter said. His voice was smooth as polished steel. "Didn't reckon I'd find you playing stable hand." Jonas didn't look up. He kept brushing. "You got the wrong man." The hunter smiled without warmth. "I don't mistake ghosts, Hale. There's a price on your head runs higher than some men's land deeds. Dead or alive. Though from what I hear, dead's a safer bet." Jonas set the brush down, finally met his eyes. "Then why am I still breathing?" "Because I'm curious." The hunter leaned on the stall rail. "Why's the devil's own gunman hiding out on a widow's farm, playing house with her boy? You go soft? Or just tired of running?" Jonas said nothing. Silence was its own weapon, and he wielded it well. The hunter chuckled. "Doesn't matter. Words already riding west. Every hand Finch can buy will be coming this way. You think that woman and her boy will thank you when they're buried for your sins." The words cut, but Jonas kept his face stone hard. "You leave him out of this." The hunter tipped his hat. "I don't start fights. I just collect what's owed. But if you want to keep breathing, you ride on tonight. Leave the widow. Leave the boy. Or I'll bury 'em both next to you." He walked out then, spurs ringing, leaving the air heavy as a storm cloud. Jonas clenched the brush until bristles snapped in his hand. He wanted to ride after the hunter, put him down before he carried tales. But when he stepped out into the street, Clara was standing there with a sack of feed. She looked at him, then at the gun on his hip, and he knew from the hard glint in her eyes she had heard enough. That night, when Eli had gone to bed, Clara stood at the table with her arms folded. "How long were you planning to let me believe you were just a drifter?" she asked. Jonas didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. "You've brought death to my door," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with fury. "I've buried one husband already. I won't bury my boy because of you." Jonas's jaw tightened. Death was always coming. "Men like Finch don't stop 'cause you ask polite. I just stood in its way." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her hand stayed steady on the table. "You stand in its way, but you bring it with you." "I can't, Eli can't." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "You need to go." Jonas looked toward the small bedroom where the boy slept, his breath even and peaceful. The word "pa" still rang in his ears. He wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, he took his hat, pulled it low, and walked into the night. Eli's voice stopped him at the door. "Don't leave." The boy stood barefoot in the hallway, eyes wide with panic. "Don't leave, Pa." Clara stepped forward, her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Eli," she whispered, "he's not—" But Jonas cut her off with a shake of his head. He couldn't let the boy hear the truth now, not like this. "Sleep, Eli," he said softly. "I'll be back." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The next day, the hunter returned. But he didn't come alone. 20 men rode at his side, dust rising like a storm cloud behind them. They carried rifles, pistols, torches. Jonas saw them from the ridge above Clara's ranch, the line of horsemen cutting across the plain like a scar. He spurred his horse, racing down the slope. The boy's scream carried across the yard as riders closed in. Clara stood in the doorway, shotgun raised, though she knew it wouldn't be enough. The bounty hunter grinned from the saddle, lifting his hand to signal the charge. And then Jonas came thundering into the yard, guns already in his hands. The boy's cry rang out, full of desperate relief. "Pa!" The sound was enough to steady Jonas's aim, to harden his resolve into iron. He drew deep dark breath and rode straight into the fire. Gunfire tore the air apart as Jonas charged into the yard, his horse pounding over dirt and broken fence rails. The bounty hunter's men opened fire, rifles cracking, bullets sparking off stone and timber. Jonas returned in kind, his pistols blazing, each shot delivered with a cold precision born of years spent walking the razor's edge between life and death. One rider pitched from his saddle, Another tumbled beneath his horse's hooves. Chaos bloomed, smoke and fire wrapping the homestead in a shroud of violence. Clara pulled Eli back into the doorway, shielding him with her body as splinters flew from the frame. Her shotgun thundered once, dropping a man too close to the porch. She reloaded with shaking hands, breath coming fast, but her eyes stayed fixed on Jonas. He rode like a man already half in the grave, daring death to catch him. The bounty hunter barked orders above the din, his voice sharp as broken glass. Flank him. Drive him off the horse. His men obeyed, circling, cutting angles. Jonas knew the trap, knew his horse couldn't hold against so many guns. He vaulted from the saddle, rolling into the dirt as bullets riddled the beast. The animal screamed, crashed down, and lay still. Jonas came up firing, both pistols roaring, his coat snapping with each movement. The yard became a slaughter ground. Men shouted, cursed, bled into the dust. Smoke stung eyes and choked lungs. Jonas fought like a man with nothing left to lose, each movement measured, ruthless, his hands steady even as pain lanced across his shoulder where a bullet grazed him. He used the barn for cover, ducking behind the thick beams, reloading in practiced silence before stepping out again to cut another rider from his saddle. Inside the cabin, Eli clung to his mother, trembling but refusing to look away. He saw Jonas as a force of nature, not a man, like the storms that swept across the plains, violent, unstoppable, cleansing in their destruction. To the boy, he wasn't a killer. He was salvation. The bounty hunter dismounted, striding through the chaos with his rifle cradled easy, like he was out for a hunt and not standing in the middle of hell. His eyes locked on Jonas, and for the first time he smiled. You can't run this time, Hale. Not with the boy watching that. Jonas ducked behind the water trough as bullets chewed the wood. He answered with fire of his own, dropping two men who tried to rush the cabin. He called over his shoulder, voice sharp, Clara, get him out the back. Take the boy to the creek. No. Eli cried, breaking free of his mother's grip to run to the window. His voice carried above the roar of guns. I'm not leaving you, Pa. The word slammed into Jonas's chest harder than the bullet that clipped his ribs. For a heartbeat he faltered, and that was enough. The hunter's shot caught him across the side, spinning him back against the trough. Blood spread hot beneath his shirt. He gritted his teeth, forced himself upright, pistol still steady. The hunter advanced, rifle raised. What's it feel like, Hale? He called. To die in front of the only thing that ever looked at you with love? Jonas staggered, blood dripping from his side, but his eyes burned with a fire the hunter had never seen. Feels like something worth fighting for. With a roar he broke cover, unleashing both pistols in a storm of thunder. Men dropped, horses screamed. The yard became a blur of death and smoke. Jonas moved straight for the hunter, bullets whistling past his head, boots hammering the dirt. His guns clicked empty, and he hurled one at the hunter's face before drawing his knife. They collided hard, steel flashing in the firelight. The hunter's rifle clattered away as the two men grappled, fists and blades slamming, grunting with each blow. Jonas's world narrowed to the man before him, every breath agony, every heartbeat a drum of rage. The hunter's knife sliced across his arm, blood pouring. Jonas drove his fist into the scarred face, once, twice, bone cracking beneath the strike. Pa! Eli's scream carried across the yard. Jonas heard it, and it filled him with strength beyond his wounds. He caught the hunter's wrist, forced the knife back, muscles straining, faces inches apart. The hunter sneered through bloodied teeth. You ain't no father. You're just a butcher in the dark. Jonas's voice was a growl, low and fierce. Maybe, but tonight I kill for more than me. With a final surge, he twisted the blade and drove it home. The hunter gasped, eyes wide, then crumpled into the dust, dead before he hit the ground. The remaining riders, leaderless and bloodied, broke. Some fled into the night, spurring their horses hard. A few lay groaning in the dirt, wounded beyond fighting. The yard fell silent except for the crackle of fire and the ragged sound of Jonas's breathing. Clara rushed from the cabin, shotgun still clutched in one hand. She dropped to her knees beside Jonas as he collapsed against the trough, blood soaking his shirt. Eli threw himself into his arms, sobbing into his chest. Jonas winced at the pressure, but he held the boy close, one hand trembling as it rested against the child's back. "You came back," Eli whispered through tears. Jonas swallowed hard, voice rough. "Told you I would." Clara's hands pressed against his wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "Don't you dare die on us now," she hissed, fear and fury in her voice. "Not after all this." Jonas met her eyes, saw not just anger but something else beneath it, something fragile, something he hadn't dared hope for. "I ain't dying," he rasped. "Not while he still needs me." They dragged him inside, laid him on the table, stitched his wounds as best they could. Jonas gritted through it without a sound, his jaw clenched, sweat dripping down his temples. Eli stayed by his side the whole time, holding his hand, refusing to let go. By dawn, the shooting pains had dulled, though he was weak as a man twice his age. The yard outside was scarred with bodies and blood, but it was quiet. Clara moved among the wreckage, burying what was left, her face set with grim determination. She returned to the cabin at midday, her dress stained with dirt and smoke, and found Jonas awake, Eli curled against him. "You should go," she said softly, though her voice lacked conviction. "More will come. There's always more." Jonas shook his head. "Not for a while. Finch won't waste more men after what happened here. And even if he does," he glanced at Eli, then back at her. "This time I ain't riding on. Not unless you make me." Clara studied him a long moment. She thought of the bodies in the dirt, of the nights she'd lain awake, fearing men like Jonas. Yet here he was, bleeding for her boy, standing between them and a world that would chew them to pieces. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Then stay." Something eased in Jonas's chest, something he hadn't known was locked there. He looked down at Eli, who stirred, mumbling in his sleep. "Pa," the boy whispered again, and Jonas felt the words settle into him. Not as a lie, not as a wound, but as truth. The days that followed were quiet. The land smelled of ash, the fences needed mending, the cattle spooked easy. Jonas worked despite his wounds, slower now, but steady. Eli trailed after him, asking endless questions, watching every move. Clara cooked, cleaned, patched, but sometimes she paused in the doorway to watch them together. The killer and the boy who refused to see him as anything but father. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Jonas sat on the porch with Eli asleep on his lap. Clara stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair beside him. For a while, they said nothing, listening to the crickets rise with the dusk. Finally, Jonas spoke, his voice quiet. "I never thought I'd see something worth laying my gun down for." Clara turned her head, studying him. "And now?" He looked down at the boy's sleeping face, small and peaceful against his chest. "Now, I reckon I can't imagine not fighting for it." She said nothing more, but her hand brushed his on the armrest, light as a whisper. He didn't pull away. The night deepened, stars scattering across the endless sky. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, lonely but strong. Jonas listened, his arm wrapped protectively around the boy, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of the world ease. He was still a killer. That stain wouldn't wash away. But now he was something more. And when the boy woke, he would still be Pa. The prairie wind had changed. Boone felt it in the sting of sand across his face, in the whisper of grass that bent eastward as though the earth itself was leaning away from trouble. Trouble always came. He had lived long enough to know it carried its own scent like smoke before fire. And in that moment he could smell it rising. Clara knew too. She sat at the cabin window, sewing a patch on Samuel's shirt, though her needle kept halting, her eyes drawn to the horizon where the sun dropped low and orange. Samuel played by the hearth with a carved wooden horse Boone had whittled him, the boy laughing at some private game only children knew. Boone studied the scene like a man who feared it might vanish if he blinked. "You're waiting for them," Clara said softly, not turning from the window. Boone didn't answer. He adjusted the Colt on the table beside him, checked the cartridges by touch. The weapon was more familiar to his hand than the Bible she kept on the shelf. Some men prayed with folded hands. He prayed with steel and powder. When the first rider appeared, a shadow against the blood-colored sky, Boone's gut hardened. Another followed, then 3 more, until the ridge seemed to bleed men. Lawmen, bounty hunters, perhaps even ghosts from the trail. It didn't matter which. They had come for him, and this place he had carved from nothing was now their battlefield. Samuel noticed first. Riders, pa! The boy scrambled to the window, excitement bubbling in his voice. Boone rose slow, the way a mountain might rise, steady, inevitable. He laid a hand on Samuel's shoulder. Inside, boy. Keep your ma close. Samuel frowned. But no arguments. Boone's voice carried iron, yet his hand squeezed the boy's shoulder with a tenderness that betrayed him. Samuel saw it. Clara saw it. By the time Boone stepped onto the porch, the riders had drawn near. 8 of them. Dust swirled around hooves. At their head rode a man Boone knew too well, Calder Nash, a bounty man who once rode beside him in darker years. Nash had the same sneer, the same dead eyes that had watched life spill on saloon floors without a flicker of conscience. Boone Hayes, Nash called, pulling up his horse. Thought you could hide in dirt and timber? Thought a widow's skirts could shield you from judgment. Boone spat into the dust. Judgment's a word for preachers, not killers like you. The men chuckled, a low growl of wolves circling. Nash leaned forward in his saddle. They call you the night killer. You and me both know that name don't wash off with a little farm work. Your head's worth more than this shack, more than the woman and boy inside. Come quiet, and maybe I'll let him live. Boone's jaw set. His fingers hovered near the Colt at his hip, but he didn't draw. Not yet. That boy calls me father, Nash. That's worth more than every bounty on paper. Shame, Nash said and lifted his hand. Gunfire tore the dusk apart. Boone moved before thought, before breath. His Colt roared twice, and 2 riders pitched sideways, their horses shrieking in terror. With splintered as bullets ripped through the porch rail. Boone dropped low, rolled into the dust, returned fire with the precision of a man who had once lived by it. His world shrank to the crack of gunpowder, the hiss of bullets, the shouts of dying men. Inside, Samuel cried out as glass shattered. Clara dragged him to the floor, shielding his body with hers. Fear clawed at her throat, but she bit it down. Boone was out there, facing death, and she would not let their boy see her break. Nash dismounted, advancing with measured steps, shotgun braced in his hands. You can't fight all of us, Boone. His voice rang like judgment across the yard. Never planned to, Boone muttered, reloading with lightning hands. He aimed not at men, but at the lantern tied to his saddle. His bullet found it, fire erupting as oil spilled. A horse panicked, thrashing into 2 riders. Chaos bloomed. Boone charged through smoke and flame, striking like the old days. Silent, merciless, swift. One by one men fell. Dust clung to sweat. The air reeked of blood and black powder. But Boone knew the cost of every bullet. He felt it in his lungs, in his legs, in the heaviness of years. The night killer had returned, but this time not for coin, not for survival, but for something clean. Samuel burst from the cabin despite Clara's cries. The boy clutched Boone's old rifle, too big for his arms, but his eyes blazed with fire. Pa! Boone's heart nearly stopped. Back inside. But Nash had seen him. The shotgun swung toward Samuel like the finger of death itself. Boone roared, sprinted, dove between. The blast thundered. Heat seared his side. Pain exploded white-hot. Boone hit the ground but kept moving, rolling, firing upward. His bullet tore through Nash's chest, lifting the man off his feet. Nash collapsed in the dirt, eyes wide with disbelief, his shotgun slipping from lifeless hands. Silence fell, broken only by the cries of the wounded horses and Samuel's sobs. Clara rushed out, kneeling beside Boone. Her hands pressed to his side, warm and slick with blood. Hold on. Please hold on. Boone's breath came ragged. He managed a smile, grim and weary. Still here. He brushed Samuel's hair back with trembling fingers. "Told you, boy, never leave you." The boy clung to him, tears streaking his dust-caked cheeks. "You saved me, Pa." Boone's eyes closed for a moment. He let the words sink deep. Pa, more precious than any name he had ever carried. He opened his eyes again, finding Clara's gaze. For the first time in years, peace softened his face. The surviving riders fled into the dark, unwilling to test the resolve of a man who fought like the devil to defend his heaven. The prairie swallowed them whole. That night, the fire burned low inside the cabin. Boone sat by the hearth, his side bandaged, his arm heavy around Clara and Samuel. He felt the weight of his choices, the ghosts that still lingered, but for the first time they did not suffocate him. The boy's steady breathing, Clara's head against his shoulder, these were anchors stronger than any chain of his past. Outside, the wind carried away the last traces of gun smoke, as though erasing the ledger of blood. Boone knew others would come. The past was not so easily buried. But he also knew he would face it, not alone, not for himself, but for the family who called him theirs. As dawn touched the plains with gold, Boone stepped onto the porch. His shadow stretched long across the yard, mingling with Clara's and Samuel's as they joined him. The night killer had been a man of darkness. But here, in this fragile light, he found something stronger than fear, stronger than death. He found a reason to live.